Hello and welcome to today's Lemongrass Live. My name is Jo Derry-Bennett from Lemongrass's marketing team, and I'll be the session moderator today. I'd also like to welcome our discussion leaders from Lemongrass. We have Vince Lovesey, Jazz Adams-Oglesby, and Frank Steenhans. Welcome. Now, just before I hand over to Vince to start the session, I'd like to just remind you that this session is being recorded. We'll share the link in a follow-up email in the next few days, and it also includes the contact details for Vince, Jazz and Frank if you'd like to discuss any points further. I'd also encourage you to ask as many questions as possible by typing them into the questions panel. This session is intended to be as interactive as possible, but if we do run out of time, we'll follow up with you directly afterwards. So with that, I'll hand over to Vince. Thanks.
Thanks, Jo. So good morning and good afternoon, everyone. Really excited or interested in being here to talk to you guys about extending the benefits of SAP on AWS today. And I am the CTO for Lemongrass, responsible for product management and engineering. And I've been working with SAP since the mid-90s when I started as a developer in Waldorf, where I heard rumors of Frank, but our paths never crossed there. Just fortunate enough to work with him here in Lemongrass. And then we have Jazz Adams-Oglesby, who we've had some really good conversations. So the topic for the conversation today is extending the benefits of SAP on AWS and talking about how you can extract the value once you have SAP running on the cloud. You know, what do you do next? What should you be thinking about? What should you be looking at? So let me toss it over to Jazz to introduce himself before we get started, and then we'll go over to Frank.
Sure, thanks, Vince. My name is Jazz. I'm a technical architect here at Lemongrass. So I like to say that we kind of do all things AWS infrastructure related, OS related, and then also with a particular flavor for SAP. So I know the application side pretty well, and been doing that for like 10 or 12 years now. And I lost count. So over to you, Frank.
Hi, I'm Frank Steenhans. As all of us, long history with SAP. I think 99, I joined SAP 1999, last century. And then left for AWS, worked at AWS with a lot of SAP customers, and was an awesome time to see the perspective of customers and their questions, and think it started me basically to really think, how can we fully embrace and transition SAP into a cloud native world. So that's what's driving me for a long time now, for over a decade. And so at Lemongrass, first I did my own little company, and at Lemongrass we have now the opportunity to scale this question and answer how we can help customers transition effectively and embrace the cloud for SAP.
Perfect. Thanks, Frank. So as you and I have been talking, Jazz, it's all about operations. You like to remind me that it's all about operations. So the fact that we engage with customers and we assess their environments and we work through a migration, we get them running. The next thing is really, how do we continue to operate those systems as efficiently as possible? And the term that's come up that we're using internally is basis as code, right? So maybe you could start off with a definition of basis as code before we jump into the operational topics.
Yeah, sure thing. So basis as code is a little bit of a play on words for the infrastructure guys. Infrastructure as code. So if you think about SAP, it's administratively one of the heaviest products that we have. So what we're trying to do is get rid of those redundant tasks, right? Get rid of logging into a system with SSH and doing all these tasks over and over again for a large environment, right? So, think about like when things of, HANA upgrades with a command or a click, right? SAP parameter files and Git or any type of version control software. Automating any of those mundane tasks like OSS notes, that's one thing I'd like to say is like I consider basis as code. And then the other thing that we would talk about is SAP system installation, refreshes, those ongoing activities. So anything that we do, if we keep an infrastructure as code mindset, kind of making that crossover into the application.
No, so that's perfect. So if that's what we're calling basis as code, right? And I just extrapolate that, it's really, how do we use scripts and automation to replace tasks and decisions that are, performed by humans today, so we can do them more consistently and more efficiently. My question for you is, just based on my experience, lots of customers are used to working in a very, let's call it, traditional enterprise manner, right? How do you view the readiness of the customers that you're encountering to be able to kind of adopt and work in that manner?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, I mean, really our customers span the gamut from, just really like eyes on glass type monitoring, which I would say is very traditional, kind of monolithic old application talk. And then we have customers that have fully bought into like an agile and DevOps methodology, right? So they're comfortable with change, they're comfortable with testing, they're comfortable with constant improvement and innovation. So you can be anywhere on that journey, right? And so, and one thing I want to say is that like when you talk to a really technical guy, they say like DevOps, and you must do it this way, and it must be done like this. Well, there's some pillars that you definitely need to hit, but there's a flavor of that for everything, right? Regardless of your vertical and your industry vertical. So whether you're in aerospace or you're in finance or you're manufacturing, like you need to find that flavor that works for you. I mean, one thing I'll just keep coming back like to is that once you get into the cloud, you need to think of everything as operate, right? Basis as code is another way of saying, how can I empower my guys to make sure that we're spending time on innovation and things we should, instead of going back to the days of OSS manual import, right? Oh, a developer needs this, I gotta go download the note, So that's one thing I would like to, make sure we drive home in this conversation is everything is operate once you're in the cloud.
Totally agree. And so that's maybe a good point to throw it back over to Frank, because I'm smiling because Frank and I have had lots of discussions and debates about efficiency and tooling and frameworks. And so Frank, having come from SAP, worked at AWS, and then started your own company to address some of these, let's call them shortcomings in the tooling that was available. What I think is really cool is you have developed a lot of these frameworks to enable that efficiency, right? So how do you view the automation tooling and standards that customers should be thinking about or working on where we are today, right? 2021 going forward.
Yeah, and I mean, and there are two sides to it. There is always a snapshot at the point in time perspective. Whereas, for instance, if we were looking in the year 2015 and would have answered that question versus in the year 2021, then the options in the cloud and the cloud native choices and options are very different. So, however, I mean, on the general notion that we discovered early on, since the early days of cloud, so the first SAP system was running in AWS in 2007. Back then, of course, the gap between what it means to run SAP on AWS, so that distance between the infrastructure layer and a good stable SAP system was of course significantly larger than it is today, what you can get out of the box. However, given that SAP is not a lightweight application, it has so many assumptions, plus as its core to the business of most customers, it has so many business requirements attached to it. Even today, there's a quite significant amount that we have to address. And as just stated already, everyone would like to certainly standardize the aspects that need to be done, but ideally also automate to make them repeatable, to make the quality controlled, auditable, and so on. So on, all the aspects that are associated with automation as well. You want to see it ideally in real time, what your current status of your enterprise IT real estate is, including SAP. So, and this is not one metric. This is lots, hundreds and thousands of metrics. So it remains to this day a very complex question that is to handle. This is core to us as Lemongrass, right? That we like to focus on.
So just to add on to that, right? If one of the things you and I have discussed is really the complexity of running an SAP system, right? And then the goal of simplifying that operation so that we can free up resources to go and pursue, let's call it, other ancillary innovations that relate to the SAP system. What kind of tool set do you see in the market? What tools are people using to do that, and how are they pursuing it from your perspective?
Yeah, so again, that answer would have been different a few years ago. As of today, what we're seeing, which gains a lot of momentum, is to leverage open source tools such as Terraform and Ansible. So that's something that we and similar SALT we also leverage in certain domain areas. Those frameworks and methodologies, they are not equivalent, but they each add value in their particular field. So we're really leverage that even in-house for our own operations. And it brings a standardized approach and allows us to then after we define standards on how we want to run and operate SAP systems for our customers, embrace that in one unique way. So in addition, though, and it's not just open source. Naturally, we constantly look at what AWS provides out of the box. Also, that is not a constant answer. So AWS is rapidly innovating, gives us constantly new choices, which is exciting. So also there, if we look at, for a long time now, of course, classic candidate is AWS CloudFormation. We have in the rapidly expanding suite of AWS SSM. It's one particular service, but very powerful domain with lots of capabilities. There are services like AWS Backup, which helps us automate and orchestrate backups on an increasing scale for at this moment, not a holistic solution, but constantly growing in its capabilities. So this is our core business, to permanently ask ourselves whether our best practice to this day should be changed to embrace new opportunities that are either coming from AWS or from, let's say, the standard open market.
Yeah, off the shelf stuff.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Yeah, I think, Vince, one of the things that I've always been asked as a TA sitting in front of customers, and some of you guys we do internally as well. As far as like new product releases with the hyperscaler or cloud provider, if it's AWS, if it's Azure, how do you keep up with that, right?
That's a great question. So Ben Lingwood, our Chief Innovation Officer, likes to talk about the 1,200 innovations that AWS released last year. And to Frank's point, we always have to keep an eye on the horizon for anything new that's coming from AWS. And internally, what we have is a running list of innovations that we're looking at that are relevant to an SAP environment that we believe should be incorporated into our ways of working, right? And it's guys like Frank and other people in the engineering team that look at this, work with our delivery teams, and figure out which of those would complement or benefit us internally from a delivery and methods perspective. And then we prioritize and we make sure we get those incorporated into our tool set and ways of working. But this starts to come back to this notion of collaboration, right? So it's not just us as a service provider providing these new ways of working and delivering. It's also incumbent on the customer to be aware of these changes and how they can start to take advantage of some of these services, not just for SAP, but beyond SAP or complementing SAP. And that's where, as you know, Jazz, we have those either monthly or quarterly business reviews, which I think you participate in. And we are coming up with an ever increasing list of AWS innovations that we present back to customers, and we say, hey, these are top 3, top 5 things that we believe will help you improve your environment, whether it's infrastructure changes or whether it's, ancillary services that will complement some of the projects they have going. So that's what we're supposed to be doing. So that's my answer for you. So then I'll throw it back to you and say, how do you view those, QBRs or monthly reviews with customers and adoption of innovation from AWS?
Yeah, that's a great question. So, we talked about this number 1,200, this magical number, right? 1,200 innovations a year. So I would say the majority of those innovations, what we need to focus on first, where you want your engineering team, your internal engineering team to focus on, would be what of these innovations am I using today, right? So a lot of the stuff for SAP is infrastructure as a service, right? We're using EC2 instances, we're using EBS volumes. And so if you can have your team, your administrative team, like your DevOps team, focus on those first, whether or not it's monthly or it's when you get that, pub sub notification that there's a new service available, having that structured is very key, right? And then the other thing I would say is, like, if there's anything new that comes out, make sure you set aside time and money, which sometimes is available to you as funding from your cloud provider, right? To POC this, whether or not it's EKS, you want to test out Kubernetes as a service, do it. Like, it doesn't have to be, if this can somewhat, we have SAP tools now that are more ancillary products like Data Hub that run on containers, right? So how might we be able to put that into production? How might we be able to test that, right? So that's the biggest thing I would say about, like, get a POC, like, have a steady state of POCs, have a backlog, right? What do you want to test? With 1,200 innovations, right? You can sure pull something off the shelf and say, okay, we want to test GP3. We're going to do it in Sandbox, right? So those are the type of things I would just encourage, like, know your product that you're using really well. So kind of sum it up, know your product that you're using really well, infrastructure as a service for SAP. Make sure you're utilizing the latest and greatest there. And then the other thing I would say is that if there's anything you want to test, talk to your public cloud, solution architect. Have them have a POC, and use it. And sometimes there's funding and even architecture work that, is available to customers once they utilize this.
So sorry, I'm just super skeptical, right? How many customers are really at that stage of maturity that, they plan for this? Like you said, it's a spectrum, but, I'm just curious, what's the percentage you would say that are at that level of maturity that have that kind of foresight and visibility versus the ones that are really focused on, the daily bread and butter running their systems?
That's a really good question. And a lot of times it comes down to what your organization is like culturally. For example, if you have a partner that's doing managed services for you, they should be bringing these to your forefront, to your doorstep, right? So I just grabbed a great one's GP3. It wasn't ready for HANA for prime time for a little while, but now it is, right? So they should be bringing these things to you as cost savings. And I would say that, of how many customers are doing this, typically it comes from a business requirement. So, I used an example with Data Hub and containers, which is what we don't see in SAP space besides, like very targeted areas. That typically is driven by a business requirement. Now, that probably happens 3-4 times a year that you're going to see these POCs, especially the little bit larger ones where, you need a start date and an end date. But even if you just do that, just imagine 4 POCs a year to try to improve your throughput for your innovation. That's pretty, that some organizations, they say that's okay. That's 3 new products. That's 3 new services that we're activating this year, right? So I would say anywhere in that range, right?
No, that's perfect. That's a good answer. So just a reminder for anyone that's on, if you guys have questions, I think you can stick them into the Q&A section if you want to ask questions, and Joe's monitoring those.
Yeah, maybe I can jump in actually, because we have got a few. Let's see if time permits. First one, how should we be monitoring and optimizing our SAP on AWS workloads?
That's a good one. I think Frank could probably answer that one really well.
Yeah, sure. So what we are doing constantly is we're permanently with retrieving and scanning various data sources to understand, enabling us to assess what the current state is of the SAP environment, so SAP basis and below, so everything down to infrastructure network. And this is, as stated earlier, not, I don't know, 10 metrics or so. This are hundreds and thousands of metrics. So that's what we are constantly feeding into our CMDB, because only then can we truly understand for each and every customer what the current status is. And we, as given that we commit to the customers on various SLAs, that's the only way how we can ultimately guarantee that we're delivering on those SLAs. So in addition, though, to that, we have also a permanent real-time monitoring stream. So we constantly process terabytes of data, again, all on this meta level. So for instance, I don't know what is the amount of memory that a particular operating system process on any of the machine is consuming, as an example. What's the current CPU utilization? And we feed this into a time series databases, allowing us to recognize historical trends and ultimately enabling us to detect and analyze the anomalies that we might see in particular behavior patterns of SAP systems or non-SAP systems. So that's an area where we have invested a lot over the years and continue to invest in that space simply because we think it's key. Ultimately, from our operations standpoint, ultimately we want to be alerted if something goes unexpected, right? So that we are the first to know even before anything dramatic happens, so that we can react quickly ahead of time.
And just to add on to what you were saying, I think the way we look at it is it should be continuous monitoring, right? A combination of what we're doing as a provider plus what the customer is doing, perhaps at a business process level. And that continuous monitoring should lead to some sort of proactive notification and alerting, again, to reduce the number of concerns that they have with those thousands of parameters that Frank is talking about.
Yep.
Okay, maybe another one. Do we have business cases where AWS SRE, apologies if I've said that, is used effectively for SAP on AWS?
Sounds like a question.
Yeah, definitely. So I guess SRE, the site reliability engineering, I guess I'm just going to make that assumption that that's what we're talking about. But yes, for sure thing. So like we can even take monitoring as a great example of that. So SRE, one of the things you look for in monitoring is a level of saturation. What does saturation mean? Saturation is at the point in which my system can no longer maintain functionality in some way, and it drops and then performance drops. So there's a couple different metrics that you can look at through that, but if we wanted to weave ourselves down through that, that would be things like standard, infrastructure monitoring, like OS, memory, CPU, and then something that's always missed that's new in AWS when workloads come to there is things like network throughput. People don't think when you're in an on-prem environment, oh, I now have to account for my network throughput is going to EBS now. So it actually is going over a network card, right? And so like those type of things, I would say for site reliability engineering, that's just one piece that's monitoring, right? We can talk about DR, cross AZHA, all of those make up what I would consider, we call it SRE now as the new term for it, but then if we go back to like a well-architected review, a lot of those are the same pillars, right? They're just different names, there's different nomenclature for it, but 100%, AWS has got some great documents on there about, what does a well, architected system look like on, SAP on AWS? I would say that's a great place to start. And then if you want to start getting into some of the, more technical aspects, how do I deploy a system with Terraform, right? Or, is that available out there already, right? How do I, apply configuration management or best practices with Ansible, right? Should I use Ansible to do CI hardening? Yeah, you can't, right? So that's 2 work streams right there where we can use, security operations, and then I just built a system, right, with DevOps or infrastructure as code. So all of that is transferable to SAP on AWS. And it's one of my passions. It's one of the things that I'm trying to get the rest of the world on board with. But yeah, I mean, I would totally love to have a conversation on that.
So I have a slightly different view on that one because I picked up on the first part of the question rather than the last part, which was the tech SRE, which was business case. And for me, like business case, the way I heard or interpreted the question is, how do you build a business case for essentially dial tone level of service, right? Nobody gets thanked when the dial tone works on the phone. Well, no one uses dial tones anymore. So different case, but the idea is you've got this basis SRE. How do you justify the cost of the SREs? I think it's a combination of 2 things. It's the automation and the reduction of time to perform those tasks that the basis engineers have to perform, whether it's the tasks or the decisions that need to be made. And then the second part to me is like risk avoidance. And we can have a discussion about, let's say, calculating or estimating the cost or impact of the risk and probability and putting that into a business case, because I think that's how we've looked at it internally for the delivery of that type of dial tone service. So if that's the motivation behind the question, that's the answer I would give. So
I think we've just run out of time on questions, but Vince, I'll hand back to you and we'll follow up on any of the questions after the call.
Well, thanks, Joe. So just to wrap it up, guys, I would ask you maybe what are your top 3 recommendations or takeaways for people that are looking to expand and take advantage of the benefits of AWS as it relates to SAP systems running on AWS. So I'll start with you, Chaz.
Oh man, the number one thing I would say is that, once you get to cloud, everything is operate, right? So think about, what do we do as part of operations? We have, automated generated reports that give us health of systems, right? And we're looking at those and reviewing them on an ongoing basis. That goes for any of the areas. FinOps, SecOps, system operations, business operations. We're looking at that consistently, trying to make a better, higher level improvement in services. So everything is operations, number 1. Number 2, I'd say, one of the key principles I've found that's helpful in getting the most of your money and what we're talking about is the drive principle. Don't repeat yourself. Push this into your engineer's mindset, right? Don't repeat yourself. Don't keep logging in SSH on boxes. Don't stop doing that, right? Issue a command. Make things happen with one command, right? Try to think more in that way. Stop logging into the console. It's adding to your work, right? When you're logging into the console and you're doing these things. And then the third, I think I would make a special call out to, financial operations. On-demand resources and services equals on-demand spend, right? So that would be the single biggest factor I see of companies that go to cloud, start to operate, and then go, oh my gosh, I've now spent way too much money. What happened? How did we get here? No, start that FinOps practice and that FinOps review. If you're doing it monthly, it's probably not enough. If you're doing it quarterly, you're leaving thousands and thousands, typically thousands of dollars on the table, right? Tens of thousands. So that's the 3 I would say. So everything is operate, do it with code, and then the third is FinOps is key.
Yeah, no, those are really good. And I think number 2 is what Frank always says to me in a different way. If you've touched a keyboard in your operations, you've failed. So, Frank, top 3.
Yeah, precisely. I mean, to combine what both of you have been saying, we enjoy cloud because it provides us those heavy, often heavy infrastructure services, right? Just with the easiness of a button click or an API call. So we should not stop thinking on that level, whatever the cloud provides with that type of experience. But you should think of ultimately your entire IT in that way. I think that is where the journey is going, so that you don't stop, not even at SAP basis, I would argue. If you think about the DevOps promise, then it could even change the way how, I don't know, functional development in SAP systems happen. There's no limit of this concept. So if you want to truly leverage opportunities, of course, you should leverage what is provided to you out of the box. But I think truly leveraging that potential allows you also to rethink and question everything how you used to operate so far, and truly embrace the cloud principles. And again, they don't stop at virtual machine as a service.
Nope, perfect. Frank got too excited there. So I would just.
That has happened before, actually. That's what's so funny about it. It happened to Gary like 2 times ago.
I have 2, so that works.
So I think I agree with you guys. The only thing I would add is, well, 2 things. One is if you're looking at extending, AWS capabilities into SAP, push your provider to provide you with that list of capabilities, or the provider should, have an idea of what's coming and what you can take advantage of, number 1. And then 2, I think what you said, Jazz, is really important, is are you organizationally structured to have the capacity, have the resources, have the bandwidth to look at these innovations, to continuously take advantage of them. That's where I think that, customers really haven't spent that time. They focus on bread and butter, SAP administration and functionality. They don't think necessarily about the AWS capabilities, and they really need to focus portions of their organization on that. So those are my adds to what you guys said. So Joe, I'll turn it back over to you and to wrap it up.
Thank you ever so much. Thank you to everyone who joined our live session today, and also to Vince, Frank and Jazz for your inputs, your insights, and certainly entertainment at the end there. So thanks ever so much for your time. As I mentioned at the start, this session has been recorded. In the next few days, we'll share the link with you and the contact details for Vince, Frank and Jazz. If you have any further questions, don't hesitate to contact them. Also visit our website, and we'll share with you in the coming days our next session in September. So thanks ever so much for your time again, and have a good rest of the day. Thanks.
Thanks.